Namaste. My name is Ashish Kothari, and I'd like to greet you, all the young people around the world who are listening in from India. My organization that I work with is called Kalpavriksh. It's a 40-year-old environmental organization, and I also help to coordinate a national process in India called the Vikalp Sangam, which is an alternatives confluence, and at a global level, the global tapestry of alternatives, which is trying to weave together different kinds of radical movements around the world, which are trying to achieve much more social justice, economic justice, and ecological sustainability. I'd like to speak to you over the next 10 minutes about what I think are the kinds of steps that are necessary, which people are already doing in many parts of the world, and which are necessary if we want to move out of the multiple global crises that we are in. I call it EcoSwaraj, and I'll explain the concept of Swaraj later on. It comes from ancient Indian thought and practice. And what I'll speak about is how do we actually move out of these multiple crises, whether it's the ecological crisis that has come about because of the kind of model or paradigm of development, constant growth in materials and energy consumption, and so on, and of course the kind of capitalist and or statist and patriarchal and racist and casteist roots of this model of development, which has been imposed across the world and has caused such incredible havoc, including bringing in enormous amounts of cultural, social, psychological stress, moving many of us, hundreds of millions of people, away from what were relatively sustainable livelihoods based on a respectful relationship within nature and with natural resources into what I call deadlyhoods, which are where these sorts of livelihoods are being destroyed at a mass scale. And the new jobs that are being created in the modern sector are, for the most part, mechanistic, very soul deadening, very boring. They don't help us to express the creativity that is innate in us. And in the midst of all of this, we have the COVID pandemic, which has become an excuse for even more profit making by corporations and more authoritarian tendencies by many governments around the world. But it has also been an opportunity for people around the world, including young people, to show expressions of solidarity, to show how we can actually do things very differently, how we can do things with each other rather than against each other, in peace and harmony rather than in conflict, and also looking after the environment. I'd like to give a few examples of these and then try and sort of bring out what emerges from this in terms of frameworks for alternatives. One is, of course, we are seeing around the world for the last many decades and centuries, we've seen resistance to the fundamental structures of oppression and inequality and unsustainability, such as this image in the center that you see is from a anti-mega dam project in central India, where indigenous people protested against it and stopped these dams, because what they said was that this river is not, you think this river is for producing power. For us, the river is the mother. And that kind of narrative is part of the alternative. But we also see around many parts of India and the world, I'm talking especially about India because I'm more familiar with it, thousands of examples of grounded initiatives, alternatives, whether it's with food and other basic needs, or it's with gender justice, or it's with local governance, or livelihoods, or health, or education. And we see the same thing happening in many different parts of the world. Really radical, grounded alternatives where people are sort of reclaiming their control over their lives, where they are saying that we will want to think of development or well being, not even development, but well being in the form of what is good both for the earth and for us as human beings. I'm going to give you just quickly, I would have given you many examples, but we don't have the time. But what's emerging from these different alternatives around the world is what here in India some of us are calling eco-Swaraj or Prakritik Swaraj or radical ecological democracy. The notion of Swaraj is very simple. It goes beyond the modern liberal concept of democracy, and it says wherever I am or wherever we are as part of a community, we are the decision makers. We don't leave it to elected officials and bureaucrats and politicians and so on. We will hold governments accountable, but in our regions, whether it's an urban neighborhood or a village or a school or a collective of any kind, we will be the ones taking decisions for things that affect our lives. But while doing that, we will be responsible to the earth, to other species, and to each other. So the notions of justice, environmental justice, and social justice, and so on, get built into that. Similar to this notion in India, across the world, there are both ancient and new worldviews or concepts that are emerging or re-emerging in the middle of movements, where again the notion of being part of nature and living within and with respect to the rest of nature and respect to other human beings is kind of integral to these, so completely different from the dominant mindset that we have currently imposed on us. Um, I can think of 5 different spheres of life in which these kinds of transformations are taking place and need to take place much more if we want to move out of the climate crises or the biodiversity crises or the social conflicts and inequality crisis. Number one, radical democracy, which means the politics is not so much about going to elections once in 4 years or 5 years, but actually taking decisions where we are, capacitating ourselves, being responsible, and taking the rights for decision making and power in our own hands, which then also means that we question current nation state boundaries, the role of the nation, the centrality of the nation state, and say, how do different peoples across the world become at the core of decision making? The second part of that is economic democracy, where instead of private corporations or the government ruling us and the economy, we as producers or consumers take control back in our own lives, where the economy becomes more of caring and sharing than of commercialization and commodification, where self-reliance for basic needs everywhere where we are, it becomes much more important than economic globalization, and where we start thinking of the rest of nature and each other and our knowledge as part of the commons. Equally important for all of this, of course, are the struggles for equality and justice, whether it is with gender and sexualities, or it's with caste, or it's with anti-racism and anti-casteism, different forms, or for instance, what so-called disabled people go through, or LGBTQ, so many different kinds of struggles that are there, which are also then related to the fourth sphere of cultural diversity and knowledge diversity. Instead of the homogenization of one form of modernity or one religion or one ethnicity, we think of the whole diversity of languages and cuisines and cultures and knowledges that are important. And of course, at the center of all of this is ecological resilience. And to my mind, what is most important about the kinds of transformations that need to take place or are already taking place are a fundamental set of ethics and principles and values. Um, I don't have the time to go into all of these, but for instance, if you take the fourth one, what these initiatives are talking about is, instead of individualism and selfishness and so on, and private property and so on, we're talking about the commons, we're talking about collective, we're talking about doing things in responsibility to others. When we talk about autonomy, for instance, that's so important: freedom, autonomy, self-determination, and so on, like what the indigenous peoples around the world are fighting for. But along with that also goes responsibility towards other people's autonomy and towards other species. And so this is a set of values that for me becomes absolutely crucial for us to move out of the kind of multiple crises we are. We're talking about worldviews that don't celebrate money and fame and power, but celebrate life. So how do we get there? I mean, what are the pathways? To my mind, the practical initiatives on the ground, whether they're small or big, are of course very important. Equally important are the resistance movements against imposition of capitalist or statist or patriarchal kind of ways of being and living. Um, and to my mind, the most important part of this is the agency expressed by those who are most marginalized themselves: landless people, women, children, and oppressed castes and races, and so on. Their movements are the ones that need to be part of, supported, facilitated, and so on. And it's this combination of transformation at the fundamental levels, and also, of course, making the system accountable, sort of transitioning towards that transformation, and linking the local to the global. And also, while we're doing practical stuff, creating visions for the future, utopias that we can work towards. So let me end by saying that I think what we need is not just a Green New Deal, which is what a lot of people are talking about in Europe and USA and elsewhere, but actually a rainbow New Deal, because we need revolutions of multiple colors, multiple hues: social justice, economic justice, environmental justice, ecological resilience and sustainability. Even ecology is not just green, but it's also blue and brown and white and so on. So it's this kind of multiple hued pluriversal, not one single solution, but a pluriverse of solutions, many worlds within one world, as the Zapatista in Mexico would say, which is what we need. In order to move there, there are many, many global processes. One of the ones in which I'm involved and would invite involvement of all of you is what we call the global tapestry of alternatives, creating a kind of a horizontal, non-hierarchical weaving of radical alternatives in different parts of the world, in different arenas, different geographies, different cultures. That's a website that you can look at where there's more information on this. With that, I'd like to conclude and wish all the young people all the best. You have our support. And I, at least for one, am extremely hopeful that the very, very super enthusiastic and intelligent and caring youth of the world are the ones who will lead us out of the multiple crises and the mess that we are in. Thank you very much. Namaste. Thank you very much.